Hi, this is a Curvy 3D 6 tutorial showing you some of the new features in the Curvy 6 beta. I'll be sculpting some jewellery pieces and some muscles from this character. These are the bits which I'll show off in the tutorial. Some loft, some jewellery and some mesh details. To start off with, I'm drawing this pectoral muscle using the new Loft feature, which lets you draw several curves and it makes a smooth surface between them. So here I'm drawing in one curve and then using curve clone to make a copy. And with two curves you can see that the loft is just a straight interpolation between the two curves. But with three, the first and the last curve give you the beginning and end point for the shape, but the middle curves sort of hint what shape the sort of curve will go to, the object will go to in the middle. Just going to add a new curve at the beginning, so I'm going to clone the first curve and then make sure that it's first in the list of curves. You can see which order your curve is in the top right. By the name it says curve, say 2 of 4 or 3 of 4, saying what order your curve is, and they should be ordered 1, 2, 3, 4 and up in order across your object. As you move those middle curves, you get quite subtle control over the shape, and it's something which you really want to play with to get an idea of how it works. Now I'm going to draw another piece, this sort of shoulder guard. Again, select the new Loft tool and draw an initial curve. We're going to force that to be a nice semicircle. And then we can either draw more curves or we can clone the first curve. And I find it quite convenient just to sort of clone the curve and edit it into position. So that's two curves and a very straight sort of shape, and the third curve means we can give it some subtle curvature in the middle of the shape. So you see at the moment this is a very a thin object. We can add some thickness by changing the depth slider. Increasing the depth slider will basically extrude out that thin surface into a chunky surface. You want to make sure that the bevel is a lower value than the depth, so it doesn't sort of overlap itself at the corners. And then with depth applied, we can now we can still modify all these curves, and you can get a lot of quite interesting shapes just from 3 or more curves. I'm going to take the depth right down to 0 again to turn it into a flat, thin object, and then I'm adding trim lines in the extras menu. And this is a nice way to just add some embossing or detail to a piece. As well as adding those sort of lines for detail, I quite often find that the armour looks nice with a layered effect where you're taking a copy of the object and just sort of tweaking it a little bit smaller and lying over the top. It adds some interesting details, having sort of layered armour plates. Okay, while I'm here talking about the new Curvy 6 Loft, I'll show you some other features it has. Just drawing an initial curve in the top view and turning it into a circle, and then using clone again. So this time I've started with a small circle, cloned it bigger, and then I'm going to clone the bigger circle and move that down, and finally clone the small circle and bring that down. So now I've got 4 curves: small, big, big, small, and they're defining this sort of teapot shape structure. I'll just tweak the curve a little, just so you can see that it's using the lofted curve interpolation, which means you can get different shapes than you would do, say, with the lathes in Curvy. So here's the shape as a thin sheet. If we want to sort of complete the loop of those curves, we can click the closed loop control in the object properties, and we can also use the cap ends control to fill in the first and the last curves to make a sort of closed shape. I'm just going to turn off viewing the edit curve so it's a bit easier to see what's going on. We can use the depth slider again if we're using the closed loop, but if we use cap ends, it'll ignore the depth slider because it's a closed object. Just one more shape we can make with the loft. We're going to make sort of a wiggly line and make a clone, and then a second clone. And this lets us make like a cloak effect. And you can see how moving the middle curve gives you a subtle control over the the sort of pinch or inflation of the center of the shape. Just making it wider or thinner, we can get all sorts of shapes out of the Curvy 6 loft. Okay, next I'll move on to the jewellery pieces, where I'm using the brush strokes tool. This is a Curvy 5 tool, but still very useful in Curvy 6. I'm going to make an individual link in this chain. I'm going to make it out of a cylinder, a slab and a sphere, just for a bit of variety. I'm drawing this shape. You can see that on the grid the centre line is slightly brighter grey. That's the middle of the grid, and that's where all the symmetry happens. So if I do mirror left right, it'll mirror from the left to right side along that slightly brighter grey line. I'm going to clone this curve, and because this is a slab object, curves inside other curves become holes. So just with 2 curves there on a slab, we've made a link with a slightly more interesting shape. And then we're going to add a sphere on the end. Because this shape's going to be multiplied many times, just optimizing the resolution a little bit so we don't have a crazy amount of polygons in the end. Once I'm happy with those, I'm going to join them using mesh join. I'm also going to rotate, so the object is sort of pointing left in the world. We can fix this later, but it'll just be convenient for making this brush strokes effect to rotate it sooner rather than later. We select mesh brush strokes, make sure we got add curve selected, and draw in an overall path for our necklace. Make sure to click array mode, which will make copies of our object all the way along that curve. Now I can edit the curve, and the links will follow the curve as we edit it. So I'm going to bend it into place using the local move tool, grab tool. And if I'm happy with one side, I'll use curve mirror to copy it onto the other. We can use the radius slider to make the links bigger or smaller, repetitions. And we can twist using the initial twist to change the angle of the shape as it follows the curve, and the array offset to make the links closer or further away from each other. Another way to twist is to twist the curve itself. If you use the local rotate tool and hold shift before you drag, it'll grab a part of the curve and twist it along the curve itself. It's something you've got to sort of play with a bit to find out how it works for yourself. Make sure to press 0 to take the intensity up to 100%. That means it'll affect the whole curve, the whole length of the curve. So hold shift and use the local rotate tool to sort of twist it in place. Next, I'm going to make a little sort of rope cord effect. You could use line objects to make a rope. Here I'm just using a couple of spheres. So I've made a couple of spheres and joined them together using brush strokes and the array mode. I'm taking the array offset down to make them overlap a little bit, and then increasing the twist a little bit. The next shape I'm going to make is this sort of diamond flared shape. To make that, I'm going to make a diamond first. So taking care to be drawing near the centre of those grid axes, the slightly brighter ones. I'm going to draw 1/4 of the diamond and then use mirror X and Y to turn that into a fully fledged shape. It needs a bit more detail in the curve for the brush strokes, so I'm going to use curve optimize and sharpen to add points around the corners. This will help with the it'll stop the faces blurring into each other, having that little bit of extra detail on the corners. It's only done the the left hand corner, so I'm going to mirror and then use mirror X to make sure that both the left and the right have those sort of beveled corners. It's a bit hard to see here, they're very small. Now again, for the brush strokes, the axis of our curve usually goes along the up-down axis. So I'm going to rotate my slab so it's sort of facing up in the world. Then I'm going to use the mesh brushstrokes command to take that slab and stretch it over the shape of the curve we've just drawn. But instead of following the curve, we want to treat it similarly to a lathe. So it's using that curve as like the profile of the shape we want, and then using the diamond we drew as the cross-section shape. So you see it's taken that cross-section and sort of spread it out over the shape of that lathe. If we turn on stretch mode, it'll have a nice quad grid, because as it turns the slab into a mesh shape. So that's close to what we wanted, but we want to tweak the shape a little bit. So I'm going to bake the action, which is right at the bottom of that brush strokes control, or we can press K to turn the shape into a mesh. Then I'm going to use the Curvy 6 mask direction tool to select the bottom and then select the middle, just tweaking the mask and then doing simple scale edits to tweak the shape. Okay, so that's pretty much the shape I wanted to make. Now I'm going to turn this into a sort of elaborate piece of jewellery by duplicating that shape using duplicate proxy and then holding down where it says proxy and picking array. So now we're making an array of copies of that object, setting the count A to be 12, selecting offset A, and then rotating to make this sort of rosette shape. Good thing about it being a proxy array is that any edits you make to the original shape get copied out over all of the proxy clones. So we can scale and rotate our original mesh. And you can see it's linked to the action in our groups panel. The action is green when you've got the mesh selected, and the mesh is green when you've got the action selected, to show that they're linked together in the array action. So any edits we make to the proxy get copied through. And to like finalize that, we can bake the array into individual proxies and then bake the proxies into meshes, and then use Control J to join them all into a single object. So now we've turned that into a single mesh, which we can now move and control easily. Getting towards the sort of end of my presentation, I want to pose my character without disrupting its ability to be modelled easily. If everything lines up with the axis and is symmetrical, it's very easy to model because you can use symmetry and mirroring. But for posing, you want things to be asymmetrical. So I'm shifting in and out of posing mode by pressing U. Notice the lines surrounding the windows turn green when I'm in posing mode. And in posing mode, you can transform or move objects into an asymmetrical sort of composition, however you like. But then you can toggle back to their original position just by pressing U to toggle in and out of this posing mode. I'm happy with my general pose, but I want to make the scene a bit more dramatic. So then I've opened view panels and the camera panel, and by changing the camera distance, I can effectively make the perspective effect stronger or weaker. So for this character, I want quite a low distance to make the perspective really pop. And then when I'm happy, I'm going to save a screenshot. In this case, I'm saving a layered screenshot because I want to save the picture with an alpha map and some ambient occlusion and a depth map. To make the ambient occlusion and the depth map work correctly, I need to fiddle with the camera depth near and the camera depth far to get rid of any blue or red bits. Basically, blue's too far and red's too close. But by fiddling with the near and far controls, you can make sure the depth map is all grey and not blue or red. With that done, it'll output a ambient occlusion pass, which you can copy into a 2D paint editing. Here I'm using GIMP, and use a multiply layer or a soft light layer to add those small shadows in the gaps and crevices in the model. So it really helps this jewellery effect pop because it's made all the gaps and crevices black. And with the new Curvy 6 screenshot, it's saving a a picture with an alpha channel, which means that you can use the transparency to easily add in other backgrounds or isolate bits of your model to edit in 2D. So here I've just chucked in a sky and put that behind my character. It's almost done. I'm going to add another lighting effect. So I'm going to use Control A to select my whole model and press K a few times to turn all of those arrays and proxies into a normal mesh. And then use Control J to join everything together into a single mesh. So it's very easy to change the material and the lighting because they're now just a single mesh. In this case, I'm going to add a highlight, a rim light. So I've loaded a sort of crescent-shaped highlight and set my diffuse and ambient to black. So I'm just going to save the highlight in my screenshot, and using the slider next to the highlight, I'm sort of rotating it around until it's hitting the side of my model nicely. This time I don't need to do a layered screenshot. I'm just taking a normal screenshot and pasting that on top. Just make sure it lines up with your original picture. Just making sure that's pixel perfect. I'm going to use this as a screen layer to add in the lighting to what we had before. And this adds the rim light to my model, which completes the effect I was going for. Just take the opacity down a little bit. And there we go. We've got the ambient occlusion and the rim lighting as two effects which help sell the finished model. It's also convenient to have this all joined together if you're exporting to other 3D programs, or if you want to, say, make a grey render to show off the model without the colours and materials. So that sums up this tutorial. You can access Curvy 5 now at curvy3d.com, and Curvy 6 is coming soon.